morning, everyone. Today is the last day of the EOSC Symposium, and today's theme is implementation priorities. So this morning session begins with the topic implementation of EOSC, which is chaired by Suzanne Dumouchel. After which we will go into breakout sessions, and then we go into coffee break at 10:45. We then reconvene at 11:15 with the metadata and data quality session chaired by Sarah Jones. Then we go into lunch break at 1, but I do remind all of you to please join us at 1:30 to 2 with our lunch and EOSC clinic, where we have Bob Jones and Maria Luisa Lavitrano, who will answer questions from you from the audience. So if you ever wanted to ask a question to a board of director, now would be a great time to interact with them directly. After this session, we will then head into the final session, the EOSC Symposium and Beyond, which is chaired by Nicholas Ferguson. And we will hear the closing remarks from Carol Luden. So I see we have more than 100 participants now. Suzanne, are you with us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good morning.
So, good morning. So I suppose we can get started now.
Yeah, please. Thank you very much, Rob, for the introduction. So if can I share my screen, please? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to share this session to start the last day of the EOSC Symposium. So this morning we will discuss about the implementation of the EOSC, so one of the advisory group. So let's start about show a very quick introduction about the EOSC implementation. So what I would like to say is that for me, implementation is the basic level of the EOSC. It's when you move from the theory to practice and from the recommendation to implementation. This is a session which is highly linked to the S3 session we had yesterday in particular, but also, of course, to the others. So how we propose to operationalize a useful and concrete EOSC through 3 task forces that we already present, but you'll have a deeper overview of them in a minute. So first, by sharing and establishing common rules of participation, by sharing the same code. I mean here that PID are a code to nominate things. So this is the basic step for communication, the establishment of a common code sharing by everyone. And the third task force by involving the target user and especially the researcher. So how to move towards a successful implementation, some ideas that I'd like to share with you, and maybe they will be used for the discussion a bit later. So first point, the diversity must be the guiding principle against uniformization. So here we can mention in particular the role of the science cluster and the S3, the large variety of PIDs, and the fact that we have to take into account the different stakeholders within the EOSC ecosystem. The second main point is that we move from recommendation to adoption implementation. But that means, when we are in this step, that we have to define, this is the time now to agree on the suggestion and recommendations that have already been made in order to avoid rediscussing them too many times. So that means that things never change, because we always make a lot of recommendations, but never the concrete implementation. That means also that we have to be realistic rather than holistic. 2 other points, we encourage a bottom-up approach. I think it's quite clear, but with a limited consultation process, because at some point we have to be efficient. So that means the general framework must be adopted. So that doesn't prevent the adaptation to specific communities, but we also have to agree in order to move on. So that means that to reach the efficiency, we have to have consensus, even if it's not always a complete or fully one. And last point, playing the game. The EOSC project are not expected to reinvent the wheel each time, but more to fix and implement the result of the task force and the working group. and the implementation of the EOSC for the scientific community cannot be a success if we don't accept the constraints which are linked to it in terms of time, of community, and so on, because we are a very diverse community, and at some point to become a success, we have to understand also all the barriers that we face. So what I'd like to say to conclude is that we have to be progressive but efficient and realistic but passionate. So the organization of the session, in 2 minutes, I will give the floor to Sverker Holmgren to introduce, to present you the charter from the Researcher Engagement and Adoption Task Force. Then we will have Gaelle Bequet to present the charter PID policy and implementation. And we will finish with Owen Appleton about the rules of participation compliance monitoring. So this first part will be about the presentation of the 3 task force. Then we will move into 4 breakout sessions, which will run in parallel, and which will be chaired by Juan Bicaregui for the rules of participation and PID policy, Anastas Michev for the community engagement and data types, Donatella Castelli for the community engagement, and in the 4th breakout session, there will be 2 panels, focusing firstly on community engagement and on EOSC readiness indicators. And we will have for 15 minutes at the end for a final coming together with the chair providing a brief highlight. So it's quite a full agenda until 10:45. So I'd like to ask all the chair and the presenter to respect the time very carefully. And I'd like to thank them as well to be there and to be available for this morning session. So a few objectives before giving the floor to Sverker. First, I'd like to that at the end of the session, we will be more able to understand the challenge of this advisory group and more broadly of the implementation itself. To understand more, thanks to sharing example of implementation, so how to proceed, the concrete how. The objective is also to raise issue or achievement which are linked to a specific task force in order to move forward, and of course to prepare the next step for a successful EOSC implementation. So that's it for the short introduction. Thank you very much, and I'd like to now to give the floor to Sverker for the presentation on the charter researcher engagement and adoption. So Sverker, if you are here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Suzanne. So good morning, everybody. So my name is Sverker Holmgren. I am the General Assembly Delegate for Chalmers University of Technology. And I will present to you the draft charter of the Task Force for Research Engagement and Adoption. And we have been 3 coordinators working with this, so Mark Allen, Francisca de Jong, Kathleen Winkler, and me. And then there has been a large set of contributors to the draft that have been working with commenting on our draft document and also providing other comments. So we have had a series of meetings in the Charter Coordinator Group and worked with the document using the comments from this larger group. And I would like to thank everybody, both my co-coordinators and the contributors for their hard work here. We have been working with this document quite a lot. So next slide, please. So the background here is essentially given in the SRIA. The background for the task force is that the overarching principle for developing EOSC is that research has to be at the center of the EOSC initiative. So engagement with the research communities is fundamental, and to understand the requirement, of course, and then to ensure that EOSC actually operates in a way that is useful for research. And as we heard from the presentation by Katharina Flicker yesterday, presenting some results from the EOSCsecretariat project, there is some way to go in this aspect. And of course, we think that our task force is the most important one of all task forces, with respect in the sense that we see that there are quite a lot of other work that needs to be done, of course, in EOSC to make sure that it's actually functioning. Next slide, please. So the overall aim of the task force is to come up to a situation where we engage different research communities to increase their participation in EOSC. And personally, I would like to see research communities taking ownership for EOSC, not only participating, but actually working with furthering the EOSC and building EOSC. And where are the entry points for researchers today when it comes to accessing digital resources and coming into contact with open science? Well, essentially, there are three lines. So at the European global level, there are topical efforts, for example, the ESFRI clusters and other large initiatives that are working within a specific field. On a country basis, there are national initiatives, both e-infrastructures and open science initiatives. And also then at research performing organizations, universities, this is where the bulk of the research is done today, and also they will be important contributors to the data that will fill the EOSC eventually. So there are sort of three levels, and of course then the task force needs to make sure that there is engagement and work on EOSC at all of these levels. So next slide, please. Here are some more detailed aims. I do not want to go into the details as deep as you can see in the draft document. You can look in the document to see more. But of course, following up on the previous slide, what we need to do in the task force is to identify the needs and requirements, to make sure that there are mechanisms so that the EOSC services will be of actual use to research communities, to the researchers, and make sure, as I said again, that the researchers can take some ownership of this process. Also, one thing that has to be underlined here is that there are already quite a few resources that are available for researchers, mostly then topical resources, but also others. And federation is an important keyword that has been mentioned, and it is also important for this task force, of course. We need to explain the value proposition of EOSC to the research communities, and also to identify channels for communication between the association and, well, a lot of other bodies. I used sort of the Unix wildcard star here, but so there are other bodies, there are projects, there are efforts that are related to EOSC, there are global efforts, etc., etc. Next slide, please. The core activities here, well, first of all, we see that we need to get hold of the current information of researchers' positions on EOSC, and also collect research success stories of researcher engagement, to identify the existing communication material and build on that to make sure that there is a clear program for advocating EOSC. To encourage training and also organization of the existing training events at different levels. And then maybe the most important one, to use existing initiatives, organizations, projects at all these levels to make sure that the research communities are consulted and engaged and get and gather their requirements and make sure that their feedback is heard. So all of these three levels will then be important. Universities, for example, by using the existing membership organizations like LERU, CESAR, etc. Topically organized clusters and disciplinary organizations. The ESFRI clusters have been mentioned. There are other topical efforts also. And also, again, the national initiatives on open science and within research infrastructure. Next slide, please. So finally, the membership of this task force, well, there will be a second round of expression of interest that will be open quite soon. We propose to work in a multi-layer approach with a core task force of 20 persons, and then have an open process like we had in the work with the draft charter here. In the task force core group, there should be a balanced mix of competencies, more or less mimicking the composition of the EOSC Association. So research performance organizations, research infrastructure institutions, thematic service providers, etc. 24 months, yes, and there are a lot of dependencies, of course, for this task force. So there are many projects, there are regional, national, and institutional initiatives. There is RDA, for example, but also, on the other hand, the rectors' conferences in the different member states and associated countries. Research infrastructure clusters, RICs, RDA communities, and of course, most of the other task forces in one way or another. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sverker. So it's already 9:15, so I suggest that if there are some questions, maybe Sverker, you can answer directly in the chat. There are already some comments, so feel free to answer or to comment on your side if you want. So now I'd like to welcome Gaelle Bequet from the ISSN International Centre to present the PID policy and implementation charter. So Gaelle, please.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Well, I want to first of all thank the task force coordinators. I'm their spokesperson. And of course, you will find the full list of coordinators and experts who contributed to the draft charter on the document which has been published by EOSC or on EOSC website. Well, please next. Well, first of all, what are the main aims of this task force? I would say that I would like to mention, to start with, the SRIA report, which is indeed emphasized some avenues for further investigation. And you can see here on the slide a list of these avenues, such as PID infrastructures, machine actionable PIDs, and so on. So I think that, and we've been discussing that during our meetings with the other members of the task force, that this group shall represent the research community and express its needs and requirements regarding the PID policy. Another important aim or objective is to assess and recommend PID services to be used within the EOSC ecosystem, while maintaining, and that's something I totally agree with Susan on, while maintaining diversity and also sustainability. Next, please. What's on our plate? And that here again, I would like to mention the fact that this charter is a draft charter. If you have a look at it, you will see that there are a lot of questions, of open questions, that are still to be answered or addressed. The task force coordinators came up with this list of tasks, but what I understand from Susan's introduction is that we need to go more to the point and be able to choose or make choices based on consensus. And this is something which is completely relevant to this task force. And this is something we are used to doing, working with standards. And this is very important to notice. So recommendations and reports, but really, once again, very effective ones, and with the aim of coming up with solutions. Next, please. How will we do that? Actually, we want to cooperate with existing current research projects dealing with PIDs, and we want to identify also best practices, current practices, and how will we achieve this aim. It will be, we will use existing research or reports, and also work with project leads to be able to identify these best practices, and also work with managers, repository managers, for example, who have been successful in implementing a PID policy, and in a way come up with recommendations. Next, please. What are our dependencies? Many, and you can see here the list of other task forces. Our task force about PIDs is linked to or is relevant to. Well, I've just checked on the charters. All task forces have planned to work over 24 months. We've also chosen to this duration, so to work over 2 years. I'm not going into detail since these task forces will also be presented during this session. We would like to have a process implemented to be able to work with these task forces, or to have, places or meetings or some process to learn what's going on in other task forces. We don't want to work, in a silo, and this is something very important. So I hope we can address this issue as well during this session or later. Next, please. So I've already said that the duration is planned to be 24 months, but I think that's usually the case. 15 to 20 members, because we think it's important to have, dedicated members, experts to come up with good results and achieve what we've planned within the time frame. We would like to have, of course, on board PID users, experts, and providers with hand-on experience of PID handling. And next, please. Oh, that's all. Thank you for your questions.
Thank you very much, Gaelle. So Gaelle, same for that for Sverker. If there are some questions, Gaelle, can you answer directly into the chat? Thank you very much. And I've already noted the fact that we have to work on a process to facilitate the exchange and the discussion between the different task force. So this is on our plate in the board. So I'd like to welcome now Owen Appleton from the EGI Foundation to present the rules of participation compliance monitoring. Owen, please.
Thanks. Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks to all the other charter organisers and drafters. I won't go through them, but they all have worked very hard on this. Next slide, please. So, small bit of background, kind of what's the challenge we're trying to address. From the previous Rules of Participation Working Group under the EOSC Executive Board, we got a very useful publication on rules of participation, except it's not really rules of participation, it's more like principles. They're very good, no one argues with them, I think they're very valuable, but they're not really at a level to kind of apply directly. On the other hand, we already have numerous projects. I listed a few of the kind of large-scale EOSC Enhance, EOSC Future projects, but also regional and thematic clusters who are applying specific procedures or checklists of things to assess on providers and resources to see whether they should be part of EOSC. Unfortunately, there's a bit of a gap between these two things. And I think this is really what we want the Rules of Participation Compliance Monitoring task force to address, to bring something more on the level of criteria or requirements rather than very high level principles or very specific checks, because they need to be criteria which can be applied by multiple different projects, national groups, catalogues, in their own way probably, but according to some larger idea and shared idea of what should be part of EOSC. So next slide, please. And thus we have four main aims. The first is basically what I just said, to bridge somehow from the principles we have to practical criteria for implementation. And I think this is certainly the biggest thing which this task force needs to do. And then in keeping with our name, once we've done that, work out at what level the rules of participation can be reasonably monitored. We know there's a lot of things we would like to monitor which are not easy to monitor. How do you monitor sustainability, for instance? We can read a sustainability plan, but that's very hard to evenly assess across 100, 1,000 different providers or services or other resources. So we need to work out what are the real checkable things that we can look at. There's a lot of progress in this area. I think FAIR some years ago was just a set of great ideas. Now there are actual checks you can do thanks to the work of quite a lot of projects. So there's progress here, but it's not that simple. Plus, once we have some sort of monitoring and we're applying rules and perhaps excluding people from EOSC on the basis of them, we have to have some structure for appeals against exclusion that probably goes beyond the level of a single catalogue or a single project. Because if we're creating a system of systems, exclusion in one place could lead to a larger exclusion across EOSC, and that might not always be appropriate. So we need to have some structure to deal with it. We definitely need to have a strong amount of effort in community involvement. The rules of participation cannot be just set from the top down, nor just from the bottom up. There has to be some consensus reached. I think we already have some good starts on this in the work that's come before, but we need to make sure that lots of voices are heard, including end researcher voices, although it's probably not a case of asking them, should we apply this rule, because they may not see the implications of it straight away, but to try and understand how the rules created the situations we want our end researchers to be in. And then finally, we don't see that this is a task which is going to end quickly, because EOSC will keep evolving, rules will keep having to evolve to meet them. And we'll always have to deal with potential exclusions, this kind of appeals process. So based on the suggestions also from the previous working group on ROP, we think there will need to be a long-term ROP board formed under the association, with their assent, of course, to kind of continue this work once we finish. Next slide. So this divides into kind of 3 phases of activity. First, we need to have a sort of architecture of the rules, so an understanding of where the rules we are creating fit into the larger landscape. I think this is already what my first slide sort of showed, but there's a lot more to put in there. We also need to have a definition of what an EOSC catalogue is, because we think this is where the rules will be applied. So we need to have a definition and a list of them. And something I think all of the task forces may want to consider, a list of the kind of inputs and outputs, or particularly inputs we need from other task forces to do our work, because I think they'll need to know that early on so they can put it into their work plans. Then after this, we move on to a phase where we actually write the expanded rules of participation, concentrating on these kind of specific criteria and requirements, and also the monitoring plan to go with them. And then in a third phase, we need to, once we have new rules, set up the appeals group, also start to work on this idea of an ROP board to take on work from us, and of course contribute to SRIA 2.0, which we need to do by the end of the year. And next slide, please. So this is my last slide, pretty much on time. For us, membership we see as something that should be open, so we are not planning to suggest a size limit. Our experience from the previous working groups is that even with a very large group, the number of active people is smaller, and we think really ROP has to be transparent and open. So I don't see that we will be turning down many people, but of course we have to keep things running reasonably. We are particularly hoping to make sure we have a good balance of people from the ESFRIs, from the service providers and the implementation projects. We have to have some way to talk to users. We don't know whether they should be directly involved in the group because of the level of discussion, but we need to make sure we have a real channel to deal with their input, some methodology. We plan for 24 months, although we could stop earlier if an ROP board was already in place to take on from us. And our dependencies are basically pretty much from everyone, because every group will probably have some sort of rule that we need to somehow implement, so we'll need to take input from them. That's all, thanks.
Thank you very much, Owen. Thank you for the presentation. So now, so Owen, as for the others, please answer to the comment if there are some in the chat. Now we can move to the 4 breakout session. Just to remind you that at 10:30 we will come back together in this plenary session. Just to be fair with the last presenter in each breakout session, please, for the chairs, keep an eye on the time so everyone can have time to make his or her own presentation. So now, Rob, maybe you want to explain how, yeah. So
sure.
thank you.
So Federico will explain to us how the breakouts will work. At the very least, I think the chairs and the speakers will be automatically ported. Federico.
Okay, well, so I will be opening the breakouts now. You should already be assigned to them, and you can move freely between one to another. In case you're having issues because your Zoom version doesn't allow you to do so, please type it in the chat and do not say it verbally, okay? Type it in the chat and I will move you to the breakout. So good luck, everyone, and see you soon.
No, but I think Yeah, so it's, I know it was quite complicated to manage because we had a lot of, actually we were one of the advisory group with the most of the application for the EOSC symposium, so very difficult to select and to organize. So I know we had not enough time to...
But let's organize the next one. So there are so many ideas and many questions. Yes, we didn't have the time to respond.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you all. So I'd like to ask to the different chairs very quickly, 3 minutes, the main food for thought that you can bring from your breakout session. So maybe we can start with you, Donatella.
So I was trying to summarize.
Sure, it's not an easy task, I know.
So we had 5 sessions that were addressing different aspects of community engagement for different communities, youth communities. So what I think is that the topics that were touched, so the problem is complex of researcher engagement, and it touches a lot of different objectives and activities. But I think that the presentation that we had today actually offer good input for the research engagement task force. So they are looking at different aspects. So there was, for example, a presentation by, we started with a presentation by David Mellon that actually spoke about the fact that we are not, it's important, of course, to have a European Open Science Cloud, but it's also important that researchers have incentive to support open science adoption. So the open science is the tool that facilitates the open science adoption. So we need to convince, to have incentives for the researchers to go in this direction. We also had, we saw a nice video because there is an international network open science community that is being formed, started to be formed in 2018 in Utrecht. And now it has a number of local communities that are discussing about open science and the need of potential users to be connected, and the need of those that should behave according to the open science principle. And this community is a potential community to be connected to the EOSC. We had a presentation from one of the projects funded by the EOSC Secretariat, that is ADA for EOSC, that spoke about the work that they are doing for identifying a number of indicators that try to understand how open science and is already something that is supported or is understood in the context of different disciplinary communities. So they are already contacted a lot of different communities, analyzing, for example, at what level there are the policies, if there are roadmap or if there is technical support. Then we have 2 presentations now from, let's say outcomes from EOSCAB. One presentation by Gaelle Bequet from the EGI Foundation that described as what it was experience of they have in let's say interacting with a lot of different researchers in the context of the competence centers and early adopter pilots that they found in the EOSCAB services. And And the other presentation was again from the EGI Foundation, Sai Holzinger. And he describes that an initiative that was created in the context of the EOSC project, but that will continue on future. And this is related to, let's say, helping companies and startups to take advantage of EOSC. So this, especially these two so there was a lot of discussion related to these two presentations regarding, let's say, how EOSC should be communicated and to whom it should be communicated, because the main message that emerged was that researchers, companies, or SMEs really don't need to know, they don't want to know the details of EOSC. They have a problem, and they want this problem to be solved. So they want to understand what EOSC, how EOSC can solve the problem. In particular, there was a discussion saying that open science is a new approach. So what we expect is that EOSC will provide also services and facility to support the open science approach, meaning, for example, collecting different metrics or different indicators for example, the evaluation, the new evaluation criteria that open science is proposing. So this was what we discussed.
Thank you very much, Donatella. Thank you for this very quick and precise overview. Let's move to Juan. Juan, for the breakout, the first breakout, community rules of participation and PID policy. For 3 minutes, please, Juan, if possible.
Thank you, Suzanne. Yes, I'll try and summarize. We had 6 talks, 2 on the rules of participation, 4 on PID policy. I think in both of these areas, it's notable that we are moving from principles that were established by the previous governance, and the PID policy documents and the ROP documents were really about principles. And both of these areas we're moving towards implementation now, so we have to work out what we can really do in practice and how we turn those principles into practical things. I won't try and cover the 6 talks. I'm not even sure I would have time to read the titles of the 6 talks, let alone discuss the content. So I'll just say a few things that came up in discussion. Regarding rules of participation, there is a discussion around whether this is going to be a self-certification for certain things, and whether things will be certified by others, and how much we can trust the individuals or the organizations that are putting services and data on the EOSC to self-certify and give themselves quality metrics and things like that was discussed. We discussed the machine readability of rules and machine interpretability of rules. Is that something we're aiming for? Obviously, that's to be decided, so we didn't have a conclusion, but it's a very interesting topic. Regarding the PID policy, we discussed the areas like, are we talking about persistence of the object that the PID is pointing to? Are we talking about the persistence of the PID? Are we talking about the persistence of the link between the two, etc.? And there was a kind of move towards the feeling that even if the objects cannot persist, because as we go forward in time, we build up more legacy and the cost of preservation get higher and higher. So it's not the case that everything that is important today will be important in 10 years' time. That it might be a good idea to have tombstoning so that we can put a reference when an object is removed. If the PID is still there, then we can have a tombstone which says, here was this digital object, and it had these properties A, B, C, D, and that metadata in itself might be very important in many cases, even when the digital object can no longer be kept. We noted an important relationship to the Task Force on Long-Term Preservation, because it's obvious in the name, really, preservation and persistence are not so far apart. With regards to handling things that are no longer there, we discussed whether you can have a primary service that dereferences the PID, but if the dereference is no longer there, then you could have a secondary service that goes to an archive or something like that, which would take over if the first one fails. Yeah, I think that's probably all the points we made. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. Thank you for that. So let's move now to the breakout 2 with Anastas, please.
Thank you, Suzanne. I will try to really be quick. I won't go into the details of the papers. I just want to thank the presenters, Ignacio, Isabel, Soren, Ina, and Perzemek for the excellent presentations, but also for the lively discussion at the end. We discussed mostly on 2 topics on what should the EOSC Association do or the task force do to improve the user engagement, and several keywords popped up like the awareness, but also simplification. More multidisciplinary approach, more broader community involvement, the citizen scientists also. It would be very useful to increase visibility, but also quality and capability and capacity of the national services, and somehow make these national infrastructures interoperable and visible on a pan-European level. The interoperability was mentioned several times in the discussions. The simplification of the access through simple single sign-ons, through simple data integration between services, the integration between data and services, but to be done in an agile and an incremental manner that the users will understand and find it acceptable and useful. And of course, a very strong attitude on the communication and dissemination. EOSC will need to help get the attention of the users. We need to have, even if for the communities that we do have a large user base, we still need more integration. We need more synergies. We need synergy mappings. We need sharing of best practices, policies, measures, and user guidance. And finally, a topic that arose within the 2 of the presentations was to change the way we do science, to change the way we do publishing, to be more precise, to move from the images to digital science and to the interactive publishing. The tools are there, but we have to push publishers to adopt them, but also we have to work strongly with the users on a bottom-up approach to somehow familiarize them and to start using these excellent tools that allow them to produce scientific results that will have integrated publishing and data, that will have interactive publishing and data, that will have machine assistance, knowledge representation, everything available for them and accepted by the publishers. So that would be just like a 1-minute summary of the very interesting discussion. Thanks again to all the presenters.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anastas, for this very quick overview. Let's move to a short presentations, a short brief from the 2 panels. So first, Federica for 2 minutes, and then Eleni, and thank you, Federica.
Okay, thank you. So in our first half, we presented the Infra-EOSC project ongoing action to create an EOSC readiness dashboard of indicators, and the co-creation process behind it, and the challenges we are meeting, and discuss the use cases and the best way to introduce new indicators in this framework. Because of a very tight schedule, I feel we just skimmed the surface of this discussion here, but I think we got 2 main points. The importance of being as inclusive as possible in the definition of indicators to monitor the EOSC progresses, and to include all key actors from the EOSC governance to the very different scientific communities we have, and the suggestion that we should work with the community on a use case basis to better understand what we really want to achieve with them. But most importantly, I think that after we had recently liaised with EOSC Future and its activity on the indicators. So we took here another major step towards the co-creation of common indicators, which is the first step to coordinate with the EOSC Association and the steering board on this topic, which were both represented in the panel. And I thank you very much, Ronan and Volker, for being there. And we will be following up in the next weeks and months. And it is only a step, but we all know that in every travel, however far you go, you start with the first step.
Thank you, Federica. Thank you very much. Let's move to Eleni.
Yes, last but not least, thank you very much, Ron, for our participants, our audience, our speakers. I think that the mission has been accomplished by this day today. We have already been engaged with the 3 other projects for the same call. So today's meeting with all the EOSC ecosystem has been just a start glance of food for thought for the engagement facilities and perspectives between the 4 projects and much more. So the services coming from Cos4Cloud and iNode would be eventually and very soon be involved in NEANIAS and the other projects, and triple also offerings are going to be used in the near future. And the main challenge about all this discussion was how to engage our audience, our communities, the end users, researchers, business oriented environments in a more EOSC oriented way. And I think thank you for the invitation. More to come from our services, from our projects all together, and let's organize the next workshop. I think this was the first glance for the next meeting. Thank you again, all the participants, Federica, her panelists, our speakers, everybody.
Thank you very much, Eleni and Federica, for this overview on the breakout 4. So we arrive now to the end of our session, the first session of the day, of the last day of the EOSC symposium. It was just to say that it was really difficult to manage with all the different presentation. We very nice and interesting application we have for this session. I would like to thank in particular Anastas, with whom I prepared the session and who provided me a lot of help. So it was really nice to work with you, Anastas. Also a special thank to the EOSCsecretariat, and especially Bob, Nick, Gareth, Rob, Nick, Gareth, Federico, for the help you provided, not only for the session, but for the other session where I was involved. And also to say to everyone that I know that it's maybe a bit frustrating to have some presentation without having time to discuss. At some point, it can be also frustrating to have less presentation, but more time to discuss. So it's always very difficult to make this kind of choice. I just hope that today was, let's say, a starting day to develop and to work on our advisory group on implementation, and that you can all go with food for thought in order to prepare the concrete action that we have to do in order to have a successful EOSC. So many thanks to you all, and now I can give the floor to you, Rob, for introducing the rest of the day, and thank you again, Rob, for your support.